Recently, a video clip on television from Minneapolis depicted a masked, heavily armed ICE agent struggling to get his big-ass gun in one of those black SUVs they drive around, terrorizing citizens. The weapon was so long and bulky, he had to open the car window, get in the front seat, and then feed the gun in through the window so it could lay crossways on his lap with the long muzzle sticking out the window. It was funny to watch, but reminded anyone seeing it that those are military-grade weapons. They are weapons of war, meant to be carried into battle by American troops against foreign enemies. But they are being used to chase down and capture men like 62-year-old Julio Galvez.
Let's bring in Jason Hauser. He's the former chief of staff of ICE.
When you step back and you sort of look at this event, coming in with sort of that armored vehicle, typically going after convicted criminals, that would not have been the case.
This escalated because they found out that I work for Turning Point USA.
We're living in a country now where an ICE officer gets attacked daily.
Let's stop here for a moment and clarify what this episode is, and perhaps more importantly, what it is not. Now, the public conflict surrounding ICE has become chaotic, highly visible, and deeply contested. And there are facts we can establish, and there are sharply different interpretations of said facts. Officers confronting resistance, protests that have turned into violent confrontations of officers, reporters, and bystanders caught in the middle, and competing claims about public safety, civil rights, and the authority of the law. But this episode is not an investigation of every confrontation. Julio Galvez was taken from his life in Corpus Christi, Texas, in July 2024, before the presidential election and before the current images became a nationwide debate over the role and presence of ICE in our communities. His story is not proof of a partisan argument. It is a case study in what happens when law, family, history, and belonging pull in different directions. This is the second chapter of our three-part series on migration and immigration in Texas.
From prairie winds to courthouse doors, these tales run deep to the Texas core. With Texas tales, there's always more. So come chase the past with Lone Star Lore.
Before we begin, if you have not yet listened to episode 9, Texas, a state of movement and change, you may want to back up one episode and begin there. In that chapter, we examine the long and often difficult history of movement in and out of Texas, and the ways governments have tried to regulate who may enter, who may remain, and who is considered to belong. That history provides the larger framework for the story we're about to tell, the story of Julio Galvez. As we worked on this story, my sister Katie arranged a virtual conversation with Julio, Ida, and their family. We were fortunate to record that call, allowing us to hear directly from the people living through this story. You'll hear their voices throughout this episode.
Julio was deported back to Guatemala in 2024. He left a wife and 3 grown children here. Without his income, his son had to drop out of college to help his mother, Julio's wife, Ida, earn a living.
I started Del Mar after I finished high school in 2022, and I attended for 2 years in nursing, my prerequisites. And I completed all of them, and I was going to apply to the nursing program after I took a semester off. During that semester off is when, my dad got taken. So I didn't go back to school after that happened.
Because of the money.
It was just a money issue,
The daughter had just graduated from college. The third child has limitations and needs family care all the time. So suddenly, they have the major portion of their income and the aid and support of a husband and father gone. The people Julio worked for had to find someone else to finish jobs he had started. Everybody who knew Julio echoed the same general assessment. Quote, Julio can do anything. Julio can do everything. If he were still here, Julio would help you with that.
I have people constantly saying, hey, do you know when Julio's going to be back? We really want to do some stuff with our property, and I don't know when Julio's going to be back.
We work on the roof, we work on the framing, we work on the concrete, we work in the electrical. We work at the drywall. Anything we
Anything
like I
and
say.
everything.
And like I say, we are faithful, and very soon, finally, we can reach those opportunity to make my family better, like the government said. Very state, very country, very good economy. I hope we can support and we can help to those economies coming up.
You also still get phone calls from people that you worked for in Corpus, and they still call you down in Guatemala to try to ask you
Right.
for solving problems for work, right?
Yeah, I have like maybe like a month ago. We have like one family over there in Ocean Drive. And she still call me and she say, "I waiting for you when you come." She say, "When you come, because I need you help for real. I need you help over here to do the job. I need to remodel all that my whole house." She said, "Leo, I'm sorry, but I'm not there. I can do it. I don't know exactly how much time I'm be here because I don't want you lose money to waiting for me, and I can give you the date exactly when I come back."
He and his family were also valuable members of their church, and Julio was always willing to help with chores around the church or undertake a remodeling project. Those people, like all the others we have mentioned, will miss Julio's many kindnesses. And the list goes on like a stone tossed into a pond. The circles just keep spreading out from the spot where the stone sank.
This is the kind of life I want to live, to live freedom and like I'm live to connection with a lot of people, and the people need help or people need something. We can do it like in those new church like we build and over there in Floor of Love, the new life.
We don't really know how many people depended on Julio, but we can add all of them to the list of those affected by his absence. One specifically we can add to the list of people who will miss Julio are those housed at the La Posada San Benito refugee shelter. He assisted residents in building projects so they could learn a trade. One of his trips was documented. He said he made the trek, quote, to reciprocate the kindness afforded to him during one of the most trying times in his life. At the time the article was written, Julio had been in the States 5 years, and he was, quote, still undergoing a lengthy and emotionally taxing legal process after applying for asylum in the United States. This is the human cost of America's deportation scheme, reduced down to the life of one man, Julio Galvez, and those who knew him in whatever capacity. As of late March 2026, the current administration had deported as many as 675,000 people.
That figure comes from the Department of Homeland Security. Other government releases and independent analyses have produced different totals, so the precise number remains disputed. But the disagreement is over the count, not the scale. By any measure, hundreds of thousands of people were removed, and each removal reached beyond the person being deported into families, workplaces, churches, and communities. Numbers can tell us how large something is, but they can't show us the shape of one individual life.
In fact, there is a great deal to learn about Julio Galvez. While being held in one of the so-called immigration centers awaiting deportation, he wrote his abbreviated autobiography. So we have his words to tell his story.
It's really, it's in front of my heart. I'm by the notebook over there in Sierra Blanca, and I'm start to read it and writing to try to finish those my own story.
He was born January the 9th, 1964. He turned 62 just a few months ago. He was one of 11 children born to a poor farming family in Guatemala. Julio was 12 when the earthquake of 1976 hit his village, destroyed his home, and injured him severely. Quote, I was under the entire roof frame because the walls had collapsed and the entire structure fell on us. The earthquake nearly destroyed his country, injuring 75 to 100,000. and killing 25 to 30,000. He was taken to several field hospitals and then transferred to a hospital in Guatemala City, where he stayed for a year, quote, in a flat bed without a pillow and with a catheter to relieve the flow of blood and urine from the back of my body. After that, confined to a wheelchair and still suffering from the internal damage to his bowels, bladder, and legs, he was transferred home. The transfer must have been excruciating for him. Even after 50 years, Julio recalled, quote, I was screaming like a 1.5-year-old child. Luckily, the neighborhood vet, not a professional, but a man who handled the animals of the locals, came by to see Julio. He told Julio, quote, I have cured cows and horses, but I can treat with the same treatment. Using a mixture of honey and alcohol, he, quote, took over my leg and began to rub it and stretch it. The healer's massages and exercises improved Julio's legs so much that after a few months, Julio could walk by holding onto the walls, doors, and anything else handy. In a year, he had progressed a great deal, but it was obvious that he might not ever be able to walk enough to be of any assistance in the family farming business. He was just another mouth to feed, and he knew it. Julio writes, quote, with tears in my eyes, I told my father my decision was to leave. Finally, his father told him yes, he could go, quote, but that I should behave well and take care of myself from drugs and thievery. Julio departed to a nearby town where he got a series of jobs to support himself. He was about 14 or 15 at this time. His existence was often perilous. Julio writes, quote, I can say that many times I slept on the street because I didn't have enough money to rent an apartment. I went to sleep hungry, but I thought they would make fun of me if I decided to return. I gathered strength and courage to face it. Finally, after another year or so of often homelessness, he moved to Guatemala City, where he worked in a sawmill and first became acquainted with lumber and wood in a professional manner. Quote, in that sawmill, all the machines were electric. Yes, I was my life learning to work for my future. Later in America, Julio developed into a very talented carpenter and builder.
Julio left home believing that a life unable to contribute had become a burden. In the years that followed, work became more than a way to survive. It became the way he proved his value, to himself, to his family, and eventually to every community that came to depend on him.
Around the age of 17 or 18, Julio decided to go home to visit his family and inadvertently stepped into the big middle of the Guatemalan Civil War, which raged from 1960 to 1996. The rebel forces controlled the district where his family lived and refused to allow Julio to leave. He was basically kidnapped into the rebel armed forces and trained as a medic and a sentry.
To better understand the history surrounding Julio's experience, we spoke with Dr. Sarah Blue, the Jones Professor of Southwestern Studies and an Associate Professor of Geography and Environmental Studies at Texas State University. Her research focuses on migration and asylum across the U.S.-Mexico border and the broader Americas. Is there anything else on there that would pertain to sort of the backstory of Guatemala?
Yeah, I mean, I just noted that it was more a case of there were guerrilla fighters. And so when Julio talks about going back to his home and being kind of recruited, and then the government set up under different presidencies, you know, for a while in the 80s, they set up these patrols, civil patrols against the guerrillas, and they obligated people to be part of them. So it sounds like Julio was he was one recruited by the guerrillas, and then later when he snuck out of that, then he was recruited by the civil patrol. And this was all just part of the larger civil war that was going on in Guatemala. And a lot of rural areas were this is where, you know, the conflict was happening, and it was very severe and a lot of violence.
According to the autobiography Julio wrote while in detention, rebel forces controlling his home district refused to allow him to leave. He was forced into their ranks and trained as a medic and a sentry. Julio identifies the organization as the FAR, the Rebel Armed Forces.
The amount of death and destruction Julio saw before he even turned 20 was appalling. He writes of one large massacre of villagers that appears to have been the Dos Eres affair in December 1982. He writes, quote, "The National Army surrounded a group of women, children, and elderly people and brutally massacred them. They gathered them together and burned them," unquote. Other times he buried bodies his unit stumbled on, quote, "I saw the first 8 corpses tied with their hands behind their backs, with shots to the head and throats cut, naked. Some had part of their faces missing because birds of prey had eaten them. One night on sentry duty, he quietly slipped away." Quote, "I left the camp at 2 a.m. and walked for 3 days without food. He stayed for a year working for a friend of his father's who supplied Julio with food and a place to sleep. Even there, he was, quote, forced to participate with the security of the sector by making me part of the civil self-defense patrols."
You know, when I listen to Julio's story, he certainly lived through the horrors of the CIA-backed, the U.S. was giving funding and training to the Guatemalan military during those horrific incidents of the 1980s that Julio talks about. And so there was a huge movement in the United States to stop U.S. funding for those conflicts back in the 80s. And it was during that time that so many Guatemalans and Salvadorans came up to the United States. And so my connection to Julio, he didn't seem like in 1996 that he was necessarily leaving because of armed conflict, but it did create the networks for him. He probably knew some people in the United States, or he just knew of people who had done it. And so even that historical connection of setting up the migrant flows that are historic and tie back to U.S. intervention.
Around January 1986, Julio returned to Guatemala City, where he took odd jobs until he went to work for a company who made and installed windows. This was another job he performed that helped him develop a trade for his life in America. In fact, 3 of his brothers still worked there. This position also provided him with decent funds for housing and food and greater stability. Julio writes with obvious optimism, quote, "The past was fading away with the loss of property and lives." In March of 1986, he married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After 10 years, Julio and his wife separated, and it was then Julio decided to immigrate to the United States.
Julio's autobiography links the timing of his decision to leave Guatemala to the separation from his first wife. The Civil War and the violence he survived form part of the larger history surrounding that choice, but the record does not give us one complete motive, nor does it document his journey north.
Julio does not tell us in his autobiography exactly how he got into the United States, but he arrived in America on October the 16th, 1996, and sought legal help.
I come to Brownsville, Texas. I find the one office over there in Harlingen, Texas. The name is Probar in Proyecto Libertad. Probar take my cases about asylum, and they help to me, and we applying for asylum.
So shortly after his arrival, the U.S. government knew he was here. After telling his story, an immigration lawyer, quote, recommended me to apply for asylum. The first judge who viewed his asylum claim denied it. His attorney asked if he, quote, wanted to make an appeal, and I answered yes. It was in that manner that Julio received, quote, a work permit, driver's license, and Social Security card.
What the recordings do not tell us is exactly how Julio entered the United States in 1996, whether he presented himself at a port of entry or crossed elsewhere. What they do establish is that once in South Texas, he sought legal help and applied for asylum. That placed him within the legal process, but it does not tell us how he first crossed the border.
Most people can't just go up to the Border Patrol and say, I want to claim asylum. Most Guatemalans don't do that. most Mexicans and Central Americans generally are denied right away if they do that, because they just assume that that they want to come and work, that they're economic migrants. Cubans, on the other hand, can come in and say, I hate communism, and they're immediately allowed in as paroled in as refugees. And so that's changed a lot. But back in 1996, there wasn't really a legal, safe, orderly way for people to come to the border and request asylum. And the way asylum works, and both the U.S. and its international law say that you can come into a country and apply for asylum, but the catch is that you have to be on U.S. soil to claim asylum. So in a way, people have to sneak in unless you have a lot of money. You can get a visa. You can get a tourist visa, but it's very expensive. You have to show that you have a bank account with a lot of money. You have to have an employer letter. It's a long process. And they deny most people who are poor and might be a possible migrant. And so that probably wasn't an option for Julio. So the fact that he knew he was going to come, and some people don't even know, he probably didn't even know what the process was. They don't know about asylum law, but they know that if they come to the U.S. and ask for help, there's a possibility that they can get it. I did research down at the border from basically from 2019 to 2024, interviewing immigrants at the border. And there's a lot of discretion and there's a lot of changes, and each Border Patrol sector has kind of different things, and they get their orders from above, but then they have some discretion. It's like when a police officer pulls you over, you were speeding, but they have some discretion whether or not they're going to give you a ticket. We have to be careful to say this always happens, but what generally happens is when people come to the border, especially Central Americans and Mexicans, they're generally not admitted because they're thought to be economic migrants, and so they're automatically deported, or they're detained, and then maybe they're released if they say they have a reasonable fear of persecution back in their home country. Then they can be released to apply for asylum. There are very, very few options for people to have a legal, safe way.
That fact brings up an interesting question. Why was not some method found by the authorities to make his presence legal and protected? If Julio could get the credentials he did, why could he not move to a more protected position and then citizenship? The answer to these questions is buried in the quagmire that is the American immigration system. If you are one of those who wonders why undocumented immigrants are undocumented, go to the American government's immigration site on rules for legally entering the country and gaining some level of protected status. It is truly mind-boggling. The complexity of the process cannot be overstated. So much so, it makes an immigration attorney a necessity. The resulting legal fees, then all the filing fees, application fees, green card fees, renewal fees, etc., and the wait time, depending on how fast your lawyer and the courts move, plus the status of the quotas for the country from which you come, can add up to a decade. If a prospective immigrant had these resources, they likely would not be driven to come to America in the first place.
Julio's asylum application gave him access to a legal process, and while the case remained pending, temporary permission to work. But a work permit, driver's license, and social security number did not automatically create eligibility for permanent residence or citizenship. Over the next several years, Julio worked in Corpus Christi. From September 1998 into early 2000, he attended adult learning and English classes.
Initial when I got to Corpus Christi, I'm gonna try to use some people from here to traduce what I'm saying in Spanish to communicate it with the people.
To translate
it. But it's not work. It's not work for me. So I'm took the decision. And I'm go to school at night.
After jumping through the first 100 or so hoops the government presented to Julio, he then, quote, made an application to enter the United States Army, where they accepted me, but with some conditions. Julio had a decision to make. Quote, I made the decision to go to work. He chose his family over himself. but it left him vulnerable to being imprisoned and deported back to Guatemala at any point in time. Remember, the U.S. government did not have to hunt him down. They knew he was here and where he was, and did nothing to ease his path to some protected category.
Recall that Julio arrived in South Texas in October 1996. Over the next nearly 7 years, while his asylum claim and appeal moved through the system, he worked steadily, went to school, and began building a family with his future wife, Ida. Their daughter Iris was born in 2000. Their son Juan was born on March 10, 2003.
In 2003, they sent me the letter to the house to go to the immigration office over there in Harlingen. And like I'm saying, I don't like to hiding. I don't want to make to have problems. The judge, he asked me 3 times, and she say, in the place where you are in the war, you kill somebody? And I'm saying, no, I don't.
That question did not come out of nowhere. Julio had disclosed that as a young man, he was forced into a guerrilla force during Guatemala's civil war and trained as a medic and a sentry. In an asylum case, an applicant may be denied protection if he participated in the persecution of others or committed a serious non-political crime before reaching the United States. So what Julio had done while associated with that armed group was legally relevant. We do not have a transcript of the hearing or the judge's written decision, so we cannot know what role that exchange played in the outcome. What we do know is that Julio's asylum claim was denied. He appealed, but that appeal was ultimately unsuccessful. By this point, Julio's life in Texas had changed considerably. He and Ida were raising a family in Flower Bluff, near North Padre Island in Corpus Christi. Later that year, Julio was instructed to report to immigration authorities. On July 3rd, when Juan was not yet 4 months old, Julio was removed to Guatemala.
Okay, here's how I like to frame it. There's 2 dominant discourses or narratives about immigration. And people who are pro-immigrants like to see things through a human rights lens and say these are people. These are people who should have the right to legal status, right? They should have the right to education and to just well-being, right? And they should have a right to have a better life. Whereas the other narrative is really law and order, and some people call it national sovereignty. And like every country, and we can all agree, every country gets to decide who comes in and who doesn't come in.
Sarah's 2 frames come together in the decision Julio made next. On July 3rd, 2003, after reporting when instructed, Julio was removed to Guatemala. But the removal did not resolve the situation facing his family. Ida remained in Corpus Christi with Iris and Juan, who was not yet 4 months old. In October 2003, Julio returned to the United States without authorization. He says he came back because he believed his family needed him.
Like I say, it's a big problem because the damage is not the damage. They don't make to me the damage only. The damage is make my whole family.
Julio himself said that the last thing he ever wanted was to hide. He never wanted to live his life that way, but the decision wasn't just about himself anymore. So he left those feelings beneath the surface alongside his unresolved legal history. Julio would live in Corpus Christi for the next 21 years. During that time, he and Ida raised their family. He worked as a contractor, served his church, helped neighbors and customers, and became deeply connected to the community around him. The passage of time, his work, and the family he supported did not erase the removal order or convert his 2003 return into lawful presence. In July of 2024, Julio and Ida were traveling toward Houston. They were going to the Guatemalan consulate to correct an error in Julio's passport as part of their effort to complete marriage paperwork in Corpus Christi. On the way, they were stopped by a state trooper. What began as a traffic stop ended with immigration authorities taking Julio into custody. He was ultimately removed to Guatemala again. The law had not forgotten the critical choice he made in 2003. But by 2024, enforcing that order no longer affected only the man who had returned without authorization. It reached a wife and children, customers, a church, and a community that had grown around him.
Is this history something anyone in Texas really wants to own? We don't ask that question lightly or in a frivolous manner. It is a serious question. Of course, we all own all of our own history. But is all of it history of which we can be proud and hope to see as guiding principles? If we believe history can teach and enlighten, then we have to ask such questions as this. Not just ask the questions, but move toward answers and resolutions with a clear-eyed vision of the past.
We pick up there next time. Until then, our thanks to Julio and Ida Galvez, Iris and Juan, and everyone who trusted us with their memories and records. Thanks also to Dr. Sarah Blue of Texas State University and to Jolene Maddox Snyder for writing and narrating this chapter. And a very special thanks to my sister Katie. Her connection to Julio and her knowledge of this case made this episode and our telling of his story possible. This is Lone Star Lore. Next time, Julio Galvez, Part 2.
From prairie winds to courthouse doors, these tales run deep to the Texas core. With Texas tales, there's always more. So come chase the past with Lone Star Lore.